Welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast, presented by Orion Advisor Solutions and hosted by Dr. Daniel Crosby, Orion's Chief Behavioral Officer and New York Times best-selling author. Each week, Dr. Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest on a range of compelling topics, from literature to psychology to financial wellness. To learn more about Dr. Crosby's behavioral finance work at Orion, visit www.orion.com.
Hello, and welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast. I am your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby. I'm joined today by Jason Pereira. He's my good friend. He's a practicing financial planner in Canada, extremely hard to say. And he's sort of Canada's de facto fintech expert. He's been likened into the poutine version of Michael Kitces. So welcome to the show, buddy. How are you?
I'm good. Correct the pronunciation of my last name. Everybody struggles with it, Dan, so don't hold it against you. It's Pereira, but that's fine. I am great. And I'm always great I'm always better when I'm talking to you. So
no, it's good you corrected me, because Joy Leary, Dr. Joy Leary, when she was first on the show, her name is L-E-R-E.
You think it's Lear. I made the same mistake the first time.
I called her Joy Lear for an hour, and only after we were done did she correct me. So she's
too nice.
She's a little nicer than you, but I do appreciate the correction.
Proving yet again that the Canadian reputation for niceness is misguided. But continue.
Beautiful. Well, hey, we are here today to talk about AI. You've spoken at a couple of events recently about AI in the wealth management space, and I got rave reviews on Twitter about those. And so you were kind enough to send me a recording of that, and I saw exactly what all the fuss was about. I don't know anyone who's thought about it as deeply as you have. So I'm excited to jump into what is perhaps the most topical conversation around right here. In the presentation that you shared with me, you laid out 3 different types of AI. I was familiar with 2, but I did learn a little something. Can you tell us about the 3 types of AI and sort of where we find ourselves today and where we're headed?
Yeah, sure. They're more so like categories for like thresholds in AI is really the way to think about it. So the first one is weak or narrow AI. So weak AI is everything we have right now. It is artificial intelligence that can execute a certain number of predetermined tasks. And, the simplest example of this we've been used to for a long time are Siri and Alexa or OK Google, right? All of those things are basically artificial intelligence with a very weak number of tasks. Now, of course, we had ChatGPT hit the scene, and now generative AI is a thing. And as impressive as it is, tell your generative AI to basically, go mow your lawn, right? Like it can't do that, right? There's still limitations to it, right? So it's still very narrow. The next level up is basically what's in term narrow AI or general AI. So general purpose AI is basically when the machine starts to think for itself. So at that point, we could literally have a conversation with it. It can form its own thoughts without being directed to do so. It's far more broad and problem solving. Does not rely on human beings. Then the third category is super or artificial super intelligence, which is basically when the machine can think faster than better than we can, or far exceeds our ability for human thought. So the question is, will we ever get to those levels? I talked to many technologists who seem convinced it's a fait accompli. I talked to many others who say, come on, guys, like all the artificial intelligence we have now is just probability engines. Like really, I don't think we're going to get there. And they're honestly not as good as you think they are. And there's plenty of examples of that. So I don't know where we lie. I just know that it is going to continue to get better. And of course, we're familiar with, when we think of artificial intelligence, we always think about the artificial general intelligence or the super intelligence, because that's where science fiction takes us. And that's where the Terminators come from. And that's where deep thought comes from in Hitchhikers. But overall today, all we have is narrow.
So you talked about this narrow AI, where we are today, being probability engines. And I learned this the hard way when I was writing The Soul of Wealth. Because when The Soul of Wealth, this is, 2 years ago, whenever I started first working on this, 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, ChatGPT was just beginning to roll out. It was in its very infant stages. But I jumped on it hoping to be a little bit of an early adopter and said, hey, I think this could help me with the research portion of my book. So I would type in, hey, ChatGPT, tell me the 10 most cited resources on financial wellness in the workplace and give me a brief synopsis of each of these studies. And so bing, 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 here it comes. here's the top 10. Here's a study done in Hungary that looked at 73 people in, an accounting firm that were measured this, this, and this. So I compile 80 pages of notes about the various dimensions of things I need to look into. And at that point, I begin the process. This is sort of my process. I then begin to go pull those papers so I can read them and synopsize them and include them or not in the book, all made up. Every
last one of them? Wow.
Every single one of them fabricated from whole cloth. Now, it's a little better now, right? And I think there is even some ways you can do this, but all it was doing was amalgamating all the research on financial wellness and sort of producing a plausible sounding study that did not exist.
Oh, yeah.
80 pages deep in this research that's just
garbage.
Like garbage, and had to start over again. I'm really glad it was. I was really depressed for a day or two. I'm glad I got back on the horse and got it done sort of the old-fashioned way. But really, all they are at this point is a probability engine that takes something plausible and tries to bring it to life.
And it doesn't necessarily do the best job of figuring out reality from fiction, right? And your example is perfect. There's also the famous example of the lawyer who submitted a legal brief that cited a case that never existed. Now, I've even heard people say that, no, you just got to basically prompt it to not lie to you. I'm just like, okay, you got to prompt it to not lie to me. But it also makes sense because with ChatGPT, it's a very broad AI, right? Like everybody's asking it everything from like, what's the most popular M&M color to, your research stuff, right? So it's really, really hard for a probability engine to get that much broad, subject matter down with a high degree of accuracy. Whereas more narrow large learning models, which is what ChatGPT is, large language models, basically can actually be a lot more precise, right? Like if we just uploaded nothing but studies that were credible, and again, what's credible, what's not, and basically asked it to search for it, it would probably not make it up as much because, frankly, maybe I'm going in there and saying, can you make up a study that sounds like this, right? Now, how does it know the difference, right? It's not coming back to you and asking you a bunch of qualifying questions to make sure that you're looking for true or false.
So let's talk about the relative optimism and pessimism around the world around AI. Thought this was a very interesting piece of your presentation. Prominent Americans, Elon Musk and Zuckerberg, like others, have talked about the potential perils of AI. And I think you see that reflected in the data. You talked about the enthusiasm around the world, especially in developing countries. You said that almost 80% of folks in China are optimistic about the future of AI compared to just 35% here in the US. And that broadly trends for the developing world versus the developed world. What accounts for that difference? And will the pessimism of the West around AI hamper our ability to compete in the race for AI?
So it's a good question. And there's no real explanatory variable there, but I can speculate. So I think first and foremost, I think it's pretty evident that when there's a wealth correlation, there is a correlation to privilege, right? Like we have something to lose. Everybody else is still building. We have something to lose. And I think that's one explanatory variable. The other thing is that a lot of those countries, I think, don't have a big history of outsourcing, right? Like they were the benefactors of jobs moving to them from overseas, right? Of labor moving to them. Now, China, that said, stopped being a low-cost manufacturer many years ago and has seen an outflow, but not to the point where it's become, potential social issue. And I think that maybe they're not comprehending what happens when a bunch of large jobs just disappear, because a lot of jobs will disappear. Now, this is the second piece of this. They disappear, but there's something called creative destruction in economics, right? New jobs are created that we never thought of once new technological paradigms exist. And they destroy old jobs. The old buggy whip manufacturer thing, right? Buggy whip manufacturers went away when cars took over, but now you had a bunch of parts manufacturers, right? So, the question becomes, is creative destruction going to basically keep up with it? Because AI is really a very different paradigm. Like, they do a lot of things. So we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. But I think at the end of the day, the idea of trying to hold it back, it's like trying to hold back water, you're going to hold back the development of artificial intelligence everywhere in the world? I don't think you're going to, right? I think at the end of the day, this is just something that's going to continue to be developed. And short of legislation that prevents people from working on it, the free market is going to continue to research it because there's significant gains to efficiency and to these tools. So, is the West going to hold itself back on this? Only if it shoots itself in the foot and legislates away its competitive advantage. Now, going to what Elon said and other people have said, again, they're thinking about the artificial general and super intelligence. What happens when it gets to that level? And Elon, I think, rightly said, in theory, it could wage war on us in a way that we never thought possible, right? True. I mean, we would be like ants unto an artificial super intelligence. I mean, I'll go to what Neil deGrasse Tyson said about intelligent life in the universe. Maybe it's visited, maybe it hasn't. Maybe it came by and saw no signs of intelligent life when they saw us and wandered off, right? It's all perspective. So, I mean, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? But we're not there yet. And I don't know that any effort to stop it is actually to prevent it from happening.
Yeah, we'll talk about the ethical considerations a little bit later in the show. I think that's critical in walking that line between, balancing sort of the worst case ethically versus not stifling innovation. But I want to spend a minute here. To me, your presentation was so rich. It was so well done. But to me, my favorite part, and the part that I showed my wife and children, is because I thought it was so fascinating. You trained an AI on a video of yourself speaking for about 2 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. So about 2 minutes of you speaking. And then you gave it a script that was totally different than anything you had said in that 2 minutes. You had it deliver the script, which was extremely lifelike. There were a few odd eyebrow twitches that were a little uncanny valley, but it was 99% there. And there was you also had it speak in Chinese. And look, I don't speak Chinese, but it sounded good to the untrained ear, right? So this is an incredible thing, right? This is an incredible thing that, I'm thinking about. I've got, 300 podcast episodes. Could I take these 300 podcast episodes and translate them into, 40, 50 different languages? Could I take the books I've written and create content with the snap of a finger? Now have sort of an AI Daniel reading and sharing this content with people all over the world. I want to talk, you are a practicing advisor, and you're also, the Kitsis of America Junior. So I want to talk about, how practically can advisors apply these things in their practice? How practically can we start using AI today?
Well, I mean, there is no omnibus killer AI out there, right? There's not this one thing that I can adopt tomorrow and everything can be fed to it and that's it. But there are lots of very small, narrow use cases that, as you saw in the presentation, everything from helping you draft emails that are more thoughtful and basically populate with more information, to basically financial planning softwares now that reduce the amount of time that it takes to do financial planning. So it's not that there's one thing. It's you have to educate yourself on a lot of the small things that are out there and do the cost benefit for yourself. Like, am I going to save enough time to justify this? And a lot of these, the answer is yes. So you will not be dealing with one AI platform. You'll be dealing with a lot of tools that have AI embedded in them is really the way to look at it. And just learning how to use that feature is what you need to do. And it's going to be easier than the normal learning curve because of, the generative AI doesn't require as much explanation. I use the example of Adobe, and Photoshop, which is a complicated software. But I was able to remove objects, add objects, edit objects just by highlighting them and telling the AI what to do. Something that would have taken me, a bunch of YouTube videos to learn how to do previously. Now, going to the video example that you used, right? And then you go to your multiple languages of Daniel in a second. The use of video is an interesting one because you ever tried to read off a teleprompter? It is really hard to not look like you're standing there, reading out loud. It really, I give a lot. When I tried the first time, I suddenly had a lot of respect for newsreaders because it's man, to look natural doing this is its own skill. It is difficult. And for the unpracticed advisor, right, maybe their presentation skills are weak, right? Being able to send clients, presentations that are composed by these AIs might be cleaner, might be more impressive. And maybe they're perfectly fine face to face, but, have them present something and they're going to look very frozen and rigid. So that's one possible use case. And then as for you're talking about the other languages, so there's already a proven use case in this, and that was Mr. Beast. He actually launched his podcast. He relaunched his YouTube videos in multiple languages all in one day. And just God knows we get to his monetization. Like, could you imagine? Like, that guy's making that much money already, and now it gets launched in India, gets launched in Russia, gets launched in China, gets launched all over the place. And suddenly, he now is more accessible to an audience he's ever been. So that technology does exist. And in fact, there is technology to overlay your mouth. Like, I spoke to a friend of mine whose buddy's involved in a post-production studio that did the Marvel de-aging technology. And, if you've seen that, it just keeps on getting better and better and better. Well, now it's at the stage where they can take me talking to you and basically during this conversation, not only change the language, but also change the mouth movements to correspond to the language to make it look natural, which is crazy.
That is crazy. What are some of your favorite tools? If it really is like down to the tools, name names. Like,
yeah. What
are some of the favorite tools that you
found? On a day-to-day use case, I'm using ChatGPT to look up things far more frequently than I ever used to. So basically replacing a lot of my search because it's actually getting me a lot more rich information. I'm a big fan of the Canadian financial planning software Conquest, which is now the U.S. market, which utilizes artificial intelligence to, I honestly believe, make skilled financial planners better and make even the most basic rudimentary financial planner able to deliver something of value. So I think that's incredible. I'm really jealous of all the estate planning tools you guys have down there now with like the ability to scan in and tax, like the ability to scan in tax returns and wills and not only extract information and make it into something that can be understood easily, but also simultaneously provide advice on next best actions or errors or things that were missed. Like there's no segment of the financial planning industry that isn't being touched yet. And then even day to day, just being able to do things like produce, more recall information for emails as they're going along, or drafting new information. It's hard to peg one, but I think I'll go back to my previous advice. Explore. There is probably an AI in almost every function you're doing.
Where are we at from a marketing perspective? Because that seems like one of the most obvious use cases to me, generating marketing content. Are we to the place where it's an 80% solution yet? Is it a 100% solution? Does there still need to be some human eyes on what it puts out? If we say, hey, write a client newsletter for me, how accurate, how good would it be?
Look, there's multiple use cases. I think it's like one of the things I said in the podcast quite frequently was or in the interview, not the podcast, in the presentation was trust but verify, right? You're not getting something that's 100% accurate. You're going to basically, the things that are most likely to be applied here are the administrative heavy lifting tasks, right? So admin, number crunching, preparation of documents. The face-to-face element is staying human. Let's get that. We'll get to that in a second. But in every one of those capacities, like there's a use case and there's the need to verify, because you can't just the more you train it, the more likely it's going to be right. But it's going to take time, right? So you can't just apply it. You have to basically spend time adopting one in one specific realm and make sure that is of value to you, but it's also accurate, so that you can then kind of like turn the keys over a little bit, but you're still going to verify.
So we do a lot of internal polling of the advisors we serve at Orion. We have, of course, a very rich universe of thousands of advisors. And in our most recent internal survey, the number one thing that advisors were asking for is something that I think AI is extremely well positioned to deliver, and that's personalization. What does the deeply personalized future of financial planning look like? What do we have to look forward to there?
There are confines and bounds to that. Okay? Now, this is one thing that I basically, I hear people talking about this a lot, and I start thinking about, you have thought through how wrong this can go, right? So what I mean by that is, one of the examples I was given was personalized marketing for every vertical or every use case and every niche, right? Great. In theory, that's possible. Here's the problem. Let's say I do that. And then I get a call from a prospect saying, I loved your article on this. And I'm like, I have no idea how that works, right? At the end of the day, it's going to bottleneck at the human, right? It's going to bottleneck at the advisor. So that's the first thing. So there's a limit to how much we can personalize, because if we try to personalize everything, we're going to go well beyond the confines of our capacity. That's the issue. Second piece is the personalization piece, applied to portfolio management. Look, there's definite value there, I think, but it can go too far, right? So, ESG screens and everything like that, or being able to exclude individual stocks and personalize around certain things like human capital and whatnot, hugely valuable. But there becomes a point in which the personalization might get so far from what is efficient and effective that it could actually end up in a negative result. And the question is there feedback is to say, hey, I know you really want to exclude all of this, but now we're down to like 20 stocks, and maybe this is a bad idea for you, right? So it can go too far down the personalization rabbit hole. And then the other thing comes back to, do we really want clients to have a completely different experience with us digitally every time? So think about how difficult that can become, right? So two clients are like, hey, I basically, love my guy. He basically did, this is what I received from him, whatever. And they talk to their client, like, my experience is completely different, right? And maybe they're not as satisfied by it, but there may be. So is it actually personalizing correctly and targeting? So don't get me wrong. I think that anything that makes our advice more personal is definitely valuable. But I think that is first and foremost a human-to-human connection for us to understand, because we need to understand the human across from us. And to think that the technology is going to do that, it can, but if we're not along for that personalization ride, then what does it matter? Because again, we're going to have that disconnect between the messaging and the experience and what it is we're capable of.
So I've run into and had considered, we'll call it the ESG scenario where someone wants a degree of values-based investing that is so pointed that now you're not effectively diversifying. I had never considered, though, an entirely bespoke marketing outreach where everyone's getting something highly tailored. Then it's all coming back your way, and you're like, oh gosh, like what now? What have I done? What have I promised here? That's a really good thing to
do. And literally, do we really want every client? Like, imagine you have 100 households, right? Every household has got its own separate, completely different portfolio. Think about the cognitive burden that kicks back to the advisor in terms of that. Now, and that's the bigger issue, is it effective, right? Is it effective for the client, which it might not be, but then it also becomes very ineffective for us to manage that. Right now, we shouldn't be prioritizing our needs over the client, but at the same time, we have to be able to manage it. Otherwise, we're doing a disservice.
So you touched on this earlier, and I want to go a little deeper now. When we look at an advisor's day to day, what parts of her job will be impacted by AI? What parts will remain pretty human first? What's gonna get taken off our plate first, and what will remain very much in the hands of the advisor?
It's what I refer to as the heavy lifting of the industry, right? It is the document generation, the administration, the proposal. See, think about the interaction, everything we do with clients, right? I can pretty much almost give you an example in almost every case as to where there is an AI already improving that. So basically, there are data extractors that will take information from other documents when you're onboarding a client that will help you get to the proposal stage faster. And then once you have that, they will also populate the documentation for transfer faster, right? So you have the account maintenance piece is really being taken care of quickly now is going to be taken care of quickly because as long as the data exists somewhere in your cloud of data, it can be extracted, concentrated, and put in one place, right? Then you have the actual value delivery stuff beyond that. So you have the planning, like I said, already have softwares that will take it from 10 hours to far less than that. I mean, there's cases, they've even got some studies to show that on straightforward cases where the data is already in there, which is can take a while depending on how you do stuff, they can get the plan done under 40 minutes compared to the amount of time previously. And what you're going to see, I think, is really anything that involved us preparing for clients is what is going to be automated, right? Anything that we are the bottleneck. Our interaction as a human being with another human being is going to be the bottleneck. And everything from reviewing the wills to reviewing the tax returns, it's not going to be I opened up the 40-page document and leafed through it. It's going to be I basically hit a button, there's the summary. I can digest that in 5 minutes before I meet with the client, or I can reference it during the meeting and actually get all the information I need. So that stuff. So I will tell you, think about where we are now versus 20 years ago. The average advisor's office can now run as much money as they did before with maybe half the staff or less this is just continuing down that trend, right? The need for support staff for the end advisor is going to continue to diminish and diminish and diminish, whereas the advisor will still basically be the bottleneck that focuses on the human being.
Well, okay, I want to table that for a minute because I do want to talk about that, but it gets me excited, like as a human first proponent.
Yeah.
It gets me excited that, what technology does well is the rote stuff, the blocking and tackling that you talked about, the automation. And what it doesn't do well is communication, creativity, sales, like that stuff remains the purview of the human. But I think it could potentially free us up to do less sort of low value, high computation stuff and spend more time face-to-face with clients. I want to talk about this piece, though, because a good friend of mine who's I don't want to out him, I haven't asked his permission, but a good friend of mine who's well-known in the industry thinks that advisors are going to serve really much larger and larger client base as a result of AI, 200, 250. Like, do you think that AI will free us up to serve these big numbers like that?
So this is a business problem that's been around forever. Okay. And I think there's a fundamental piece missing from your friend's thinking. And that's that all businesses, profitability polarizes at two opposite ends of the spectrum. There's high volume, low margin, right? Think McDonald's, think Vanguard and BlackRock. Okay. Competing with those guys head to head is a scale game and it is difficult. Okay. Then that's largely a commodity game, right? So if you think that you're going to suddenly expand the number of advisors, of people you can serve, you run into another problem, right? Like, don't get me wrong, the number of hours to do the road stuff, as we discussed, diminishes, which means that the number of hours we can spend with people increases. So if you think you're going to use that to expand people, that's great, except for the fact that, and you're familiar with this concept, Dan, the Dunbar number, like there's a limit on our human capacity to basically keep relationships straight in our head. Right? Like I cannot remember exactly how I know 500 people or exactly like what their situation is. I think that really the key is to the opposite of the spectrum, which goes back to personalization, but personalization around experience. And this is something that our friend, Dennis Mosley Williams has been talking about for a very long time. But really I think it goes back into the experience. That time saving goes back into the experience for the same number of clients or fewer. What I mean by that is the opposite of the business spectrum is high experience, high value, high touch, bespoke, and high margin, right? And that is largely what the industry has done to date, because as things got easier in terms of access to markets, access to portfolios, all this other stuff, we have expanded our offering from individual securities to portfolios to financial planning to life planning coaching. We're going to continue down this trend because at the end of the day, we're going to use, I think, the most effective advisors with the happiest clients are going to be the ones who basically, hey, I've got all the gears working in the background to make what we discussed and agreed upon working. But now I'm not just talking to you about the stuff about the investment insurance, tax, estate planning, financial plan stuff. Where else can I add value to your life? Like, where else can I get into some of this stuff? I mean, there's simple examples for this. Look at all the stuff that large scale family offices do for clients, right? I mean, at the nth degree, it's like organizing their gardeners or getting their kids tutors. I'm not saying that we have to go to that degree, but frankly, I think what's going to happen is the breadth of offering for those same number of people is going to get wider and wider. And it's not just about offering services. Really, it always starts back with, what is it the person I'm servicing needs? Like, what is their situation? What is going to fulfill their life? What is going to help them actualize their goals? And yeah, we're going to basically take that. The advisors who basically maintain high margins and high relationships are going to expand that service offering around moving beyond just the how do I retire? It's what does that retire look like? But what does that truly satisfying legacy look like, where you can basically in your dying breath said, you know what, I did it all, and I achieved everything I wanted.
It's a great point because we've got these two sort of competing trends. On the one hand, AI is here and it's making the rote computational piece of our work easier and easier. But on the other hand, we know that the behavioral piece is here as well. And the services we're offering to our clientele is expanding, becoming more human, more personal, more behavioral. I mean, we can't talk about it yet, but next month at Orion, we're rolling out a new thing that's going to, at a high level, allow you to track your clients' personal wellness right alongside their financial. And that was not the purview of a financial advisor 50 years ago. And it will be in the future. So even as some parts of it are getting easier, other parts of it are getting more demanding on the human front. So maybe the numbers stay the same-ish. I think that's a good perspective.
Yeah. No, I think it's absolutely true. And I think, listen, I think it was back at Future Proof, you, me, and Danny Fowler were standing around and we were both talking about AI. And Danny's like, yep, stuff that Dan's talking about is going to become the requirement, not the nice to have or the thought leadership stuff. It is, again, this industry is always at its core, whether we want to admit it or not, been about helping people basically achieve their goals in life. What they were buying from us before, the investments, the portfolio stuff, everything that we thought we were doing, that we said was the value proposition, was the 3/4 inch drill bit we were selling them to achieve the 3/4 inch hole, which is a Clayton Christensen point. And at the end of the day, all that stuff was just in purpose of whatever they wanted. And I think the more we lean into that and understand more deeply what that is, the better this industry is going to be.
So in your presentation, final question here. In your presentation, you talk about how AI is just a tool, but you use the example of other tools, nuclear power or a hammer. Nuclear power can be used to power a city or to flatten a city. So you say it's neither good nor bad. It's only as good as how we use it, which it's a fair point. I take that point. But it seems like there needs to be ethical guardrails around the use of AI and the production of AI.
Yeah.
If you were king of the world, how would you think about the ethical piece here in a way that doesn't stifle innovation?
Oof, you just asked the most difficult philosophical question of the modern age, right? Is how do we create or imbue the ethics or concern for humanity within to technologies that we're creating that may exceed our ability to think, right? And it's interesting. We've already had, I'll start with the issues we've already had, okay? So every technology is used or programmed a certain way. Oh, and a simple example is spam filters, okay? So you have a spam filter. Now, most people don't realize this, but the biggest database of emails used to train spam filters is actually the emails that were collected from Enron post its collapse. Why? Because they became public domain and a bunch of robots were trained, a bunch of technology was trained to screen out like spam based on those emails. That has actually biased those algorithms towards a couple of things. Towards, think about it. It's a company that was not exactly known for its ethics. And then you have a company, in addition to that, it was largely white. It was largely based in the South, right? So there's a real cultural paradigm that got embedded within that software that has basically made it maybe suboptimal. Now, that is not a big problem, right? The opposite side of the problem is, if we don't have guardrails, what happens, right? And the two biggest examples that have been used philosophically or stories are the paperclip problem. You tell an AI to produce paperclips, you don't tell what the limitations are. The next thing you know, it just destroys the Earth, making nothing but paperclips. And doesn't know when to stop. Or the trolley car problem, which is the self-driving car issue of, hey, it's got a situation right now where you can either kill someone on the street or kill someone in the car. What does it choose, right? These are issues. So I don't know that there is any, don't ever put me in charge because I can't answer this question. I think that this is the reality is that these systems will reflect humanity, will reflect our darker sides as well as our positive sides. And the reality is that I think we have to be very careful about rules we program into them. And even creating, again, kill switches, whatever it is, to turn them the heck off, because we cannot think through every permutation of what could go wrong. So, the techno-utopianists who think that, it's fine, I'll just program it in and it'll figure it out. We can't let them rule the day. We also can't let pessimism rule the day. So I don't have an answer. I just know that, again, we are flawed. We are deeply flawed as humans and damaged in all kinds of stuff. And that is reflective in the things that we create. And this is something that we create that's very powerful. And we have to be careful about what we do with it. We have to be very responsible about it. Now, short of international collaboration on that, I don't know how you achieve that globally, but it is something that we need to at least have conversations about. And those are happening.
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's been interesting to see things like with hiring algorithms, right? You take something like a well-established bias of hiring managers, tendencies to privilege Western sounding names over non-Western sounding names, and give preference to the person with the easier to pronounce or the Western sounding name. And then you take that data set, you train an AI on it, and all of a sudden you've got a racist robot. It's really, I do think we're thinking about it though. I do think that it's good that we're having these conversations. There's no perhaps easy answers from the king of the world here, but I do think it's important that we have these conversations, because we run the risk of baking our worst human tendencies in a very concentrated way.
Yeah. And I would say that there are plenty of examples of racist robots that exist already. There's been lots of AI examples where basically the AIs have just started, or even algorithms and whatnot, something more simple, where our terrible tendencies or the data collected from our subjective universe, where people of certain color or background are treated inappropriately or more harshly, is translated, is then basically used as a baseline for like, well, okay, that's how they're being treated. Boom, that's normal, right? So again, it has no ethics. It solely absorbs the ethics we give it. And that's the challenge.
Yeah. An interesting job we'll be talking to my kids about tonight at dinner. Do you want to be an AI ethicist? Because I think we're going to need lots of good ones. Jason, if people want to learn more about your work, because you are doing incredible work and you're a great resource, where can folks find out about you and what you do?
Yeah, I think my website, my dedicated website on my financial planning website, JasonPereira.ca, is the best place to go looking for that. Most of my stuff goes through there, and I'm pretty active on most social channels. So,
all right, Jason, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Can't wait to see you on the circuit, my friend.
Always a pleasure, Dan.
Thanks for tuning in to Standard Deviations. If you can't wait till next week for more behavioral finance insights, visit www.orion.com. All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by Orion and its affiliates, subsidiaries, and employees. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information the participants consider reliable.